10. All right.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ahmed Qureshi, and I am the Executive Director of the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. And thank you for joining us this evening for our webinar on faith and wealth. Compared to other countries, the United States saw the largest expansion of its billionaire class in 2025. According to one Swiss bank investment report, the number of American billionaires rose from 835 in 2024 to 924 in 2025. The United States is now home to nearly one-third of the global billionaire population. According to the same report, in 2023, the world's richest 1% owned 47.5% of all the world's wealth. Adults with less than $10,000 make up nearly 40% of the world's population, but hold less than 1% of the world's wealth. In absolute terms, wealth is a widespread phenomenon in the United States, with over 30% of households having an income exceeding $100,000 per year, and over 30% of households having a net worth exceeding $250,000. However, when looked at in relative terms, wealth is highly concentrated in this country. The bottom 50% of Americans only share 2% of the total household wealth, while the top 1% holds 40% of the national wealth, a far greater share than in any other industrialized country in the world. In fact, no other industrialized country in the world is there that has the richest 1% who own more than 27% of their country's wealth. What do our faiths tell us about the accumulation and possession of wealth? Tonight, we have 8 panelists from the Interfaith Conference's members to address this issue from individual and societal perspectives according to their faith traditions, religious teachings. I'm going to be going first. I'm a member of the Muslim community in Milwaukee, and I will be speaking on faith and wealth from an Islamic perspective. There is the saying of the Prophet Muhammad, who Muslims believe to be a prophet of God, that truly for every nation there is a trial, and the trial for my nation is wealth. Islam holistically addresses the spiritual and economic needs of individuals and societies. Among the foremost objectives of Islamic law is the preservation and development of wealth. Many of you have heard of the 5 pillars of Islamic tradition. They are matters of belief and practice. And the third one of those pillars is the obligation of what is called zakat in Arabic, but actually means purity. And it's the concept that one must give away a certain portion of one's wealth on an annual basis in order to purify one's wealth. There are numerous other verses of the Quran, which is the Islamic holy book, and sayings of the Prophet that address how wealth should be acquired, spent, and invested. Regarding the acquisition of wealth, the Prophet Muhammad was reported to have said, "Seeking lawful wealth is an obligation upon every Muslim." But he also prophesied that a time will come when one will not care how one gains one's money, lawfully or unlawfully. Islamic teachings actually spend quite a bit of focus on the psychology of wealth acquisition and possession. God informs us in numerous places in the Quran that human beings have an intense love for wealth. The insatiable thirst of wealth is exemplified in one saying of the prophet that if the son of Adam had a valley full of gold, he would like to have two valleys. Another vivid illustration of this warning comes from another saying where the prophet said, two hungry wolves roaming freely among a flock of sheep are less destructive to them than the passion of a man for wealth and fame is to his religion. In Islam, God is the true owner of all wealth, and the individual is merely a trustee whose role is to use the wealth and assets in a manner pleasing to God. In the Quran, it says, believe in God and his messenger and spend out of that of which he has made you trustees. For those who have believed among you and spent, there will be a great reward. Thus, the notion that wealth ultimately belongs to God, we are only trustees, has substantial ramifications for how wealth is to be acquired, handled, and distributed to the deserving parties, including to the needy in society. Islam seeks to avoid extreme stinginess or excessive spending on oneself. In describing the righteous believers, God says in the Quran, and they are those who, when they spend, do not do so excessively or sparingly, but are ever between that, justly moderate. Scarcity and poverty can be debilitating to one's perspective on wealth. Scarcity is not only a lack of resources, it is also a mindset. A scarcity mindset is a subjective perception that there's not enough for everyone, and it could lead up to anxiety about not having enough and impaired decision making, including wrong decision making. In the Quran, God says, Satan promises you deprivation and thus commands you to immorality, whereas God promises you forgiveness from him and bounty. The Quran is full of stories of those who struggled and failed the test of wealth. Those stories are meant to warn us about having the wrong mindset about wealth and to correct a theological misunderstanding that many hold about wealth. In another passage from the Quran, God says, and as for man, when his Lord tests him and thus is generous to him and favors him, the man says, my Lord has honored me. But when God tests the man and restricts his provision, the man says, my Lord has humiliated me. In these verses, God is correcting a theological myth that people hold about wealth, which is the belief that God honors people when giving them substantial wealth and that God humiliates people by withholding wealth. The reality is that both wealth and lack of it are trials that have no bearing on a person's value in the sight of God. Thank you. Rabbi.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you also to everyone for the opportunity and the honor to be here and to share a little bit about the Jewish teachings and perspective about wealth. My name is Moish Steigman, the Mindful Rabbi, and once again, it's really an honor to be here. In Judaism, wealth is not simply an economic category. It's not simply about how much money I have, how much money I can get. Wealth is also a spiritual category. Judaism does not ask whether wealth is good or bad. Rather, Judaism asks, what does wealth do to us? And in turn, what does wealth ask us to do for others? So wealth really is not neutral. It's not even self-justifying. Rather, wealth is a test of values and a test of awareness. Truthfully, wealth itself is not considered a problem within Judaism. The Torah, in fact, recognizes material prosperity as a blessing. Every single day, we as Jews recite the Amidah, which is the central prayer in Judaism. And one of those prayers asks for prosperity. We bless each other, we bless ourselves with abundance and with wealth. At the same time, Judaism does warn about what abundance can do to us as individuals, and in turn, the harmful effects that can have for society. First of all, we can forget vulnerability. We can get comfortable with the wealth that we have, the lives that we live, and forget those in our society who are in need of help. We can forget interdependence, that wealth is not achieved alone. We live in an interdependent world, and anything that I have gained is really also on the footsteps of so many others, both visible and often unseen. And we can forget God, community, and responsibility. Throughout the Torah, we are taught of our responsibility to give to others, to leave what we have for others, and instead, we grow attached to our wealth. Like in Islam, as Ahmed is suggesting, ownership in Judaism is conditional. Ownership, things do not belong to us and to us alone. Rather, we are taught that everything in the earth is the Lord's. We are not absolute owners of anything. Rather, we are stewards. And yes, possession might be real in a tangible sense, and it is never ultimate. Judaism insists that even what I earn is not mine alone, because no one earns in isolation. For instance, every single time after we eat food, in our grace after meals, we bless God and we bless the land. I don't have food just because I have money. I have food because of God and because of the land. We recognize that labor depends on society. Markets depend on trust. Success depends on randomness as much as effort. Wealth is something that we hold. It's not something that we are. It's not I am wealthy, but rather I have wealth. It's not what did I do to deserve my wealth? It's what do I do with the wealth with which I am blessed? The most common name to Jewish giving is tzedakah. And many of you may have heard that before. We often simplify and often mistranslate tzedakah as charity. Tzedakah is not the impulse to want to do something kind for someone else and to give them money. Rather, tzedakah comes from the Hebrew root word of tzedek, which is justice. Tzedakah is a societal, collective, and individual obligation. Maimonides, Rambam, a 12th century Jewish theologian and scholar, talks beautifully about the hierarchy of tzedakah, and that tzedakah, the point of it is really to center dignity. Because one of the highest levels of tzedakah is giving and receiving anonymously, so no one is embarrassed in front of their fellow. And an even higher, the highest level of tzedakah is helping someone find a job. Maimonides also reinforces the Jewish notion of tithing, giving 10% of one's income. And fascinatingly, he also says that a Jew should not give more than 20% of their income. His justification is lest they become impoverished themselves, which 800 years ago makes sense. Maybe I give so much that I in turn become one who is needy. I can't imagine, however, that Maimonides could understand the incomprehensible individual wealth that exists today. And so I think Judaism rather focuses on the core principles of sustainability and responsibility. The question that Judaism forces us to ask today is whether ethical responsibility has scaled along with capacity. Judaism invites us to hold wealth with awareness rather than with anxiety, with gratitude rather than guilt, and with responsibility rather than entitlement. Indeed, I suspect, and I am so excited to hear whether my suspicion is accurate or misses the mark. I suspect that every faith represented here asks some version of the same question. How do we live ethically and remain fully human in the presence of abundance? And I wonder, out of curiosity and mindful reflection, what would change if we measured success not by what we accumulate, rather by how awake we remain in the presence of abundance? And so it is my hope and blessing for each one of us that we are indeed prosperous, and that in turn we use our prosperity to embody the ideals, values, teachings, and traditions of each of our faith practices, to our individual and collective responsibility to truly make the world a better and more just place. Thank you. And I now have the honor of passing the Zoom microphone to Reverend Dr. Robin Stoops.
Thank you. My name is Robin Stoops. I am retired former Associate General Secretary for American Baptist Churches USA, and I've been asked to talk about wealth and Protestant Christianity. I'm not sure I could come up with anything that would even a Baptist could agree upon, let alone all the different Protestant versions of the faith. So take my words as one Protestant's perspective, okay? Because it's a big group. And again, I have a temptation of just saying ditto to what I've heard these last two. There's a lot of great things being said about wealth and stewardship and responsibility, and certainly we agree with that. Obviously, we see too wealth as a gift from God, and we recognize that God tells us that the earth is His and everything in it, and we've been called to be stewards of those things. Typically, we don't see wealth as good or bad, but rather as something that can be used ultimately to either honor God or to dishonor God. At the same time, we put a strong emphasis on diligence and hard work, thus the Protestant worth ethic. I think about John Wesley's sermon where he talks about and says, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And of course, he's talking about hard work. He's talking about avoiding waste, and he's talking about giving freely, releasing what has come to us, so that our wealth is not a reservoir, but instead a river that flows to others that are in need and that need help and someone to come alongside. Building on that, again, central to our understanding is stewardship. And we too traditionally have recognized the tithe as a way for us to share and to give. And yet Jesus in the Gospels pushes us further in the Sermon on the Mount from the tithe to when the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and says, what must I do to be saved? And he says, you need to obey the law and meet all the requirements. And the ruler says, I do all of that. And Jesus says, sell everything you have and give it to the poor. And he turns away sad because there's no way he's going to do that. And so again, we're looking at using the resources that we've been entrusted with wisely and avoiding waste, being thoughtful in our spending and our accumulation, handling debt carefully, and then again, certainly sharing what we have with those that are in great need. And it's not just financial need, it's also, again, helping to provide resources, whether it's something to do with worship and community or a job or healthcare. And again, traditionally, not so much these days, but in the past at least, many of the different Christian groups started hospitals and nursing homes and children's homes and those kinds of things as an expression of the gratitude and of being good stewards of what God has given. So indeed, we believe generosity reflects God's heart. Also in Matthew 25, we have Jesus telling a story about those servants that were giving something, entrusted with something, and then they were rewarded based on what they did with what they received. And so we struggle with that, and we struggle with trying to live up to that, where we take what God has given us and use it that His kingdom might continue to reign and grow and spread. We also believe that wealth can't become an idol. We see wealth as something that is equally a blessing and a danger. Jesus said you can't serve both God and money, and that's a warning because it's easy for us in our humanity to allow wealth to become an idol and something that takes place of God in our hearts. The message is not that money is itself evil, but that misplaced attachment to money can pull someone away from spiritual health, compassion, and dependence on God. So Protestants emphasize keeping wealth in its proper place, a tool, not a master. Another key idea is wealth is meant to be used for good. Again, our resources are a way for us to participate in God's work in the everyday and the very practical of what it means to live life in this place. For us, it includes supporting missionaries, helping poor and the vulnerable, building, sustaining institutions that are going to serve the community, and providing care for our own families in a very responsible way. It's not an end goal, but instead a means to carry out God's mission. To bring it all together, again, Protestant Christianity's perspective encourages a balanced approach to wealth. It calls believers to be faithful, to be wise stewards, to give generously. Protestant understanding of wealth and stewardship centers on one simple but powerful idea: everything belongs to God, and we are called to manage His resources with wisdom, generosity, and faithfulness, with the hope that in the end, in Matthew 25, Jesus says these words that we want to hear: "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little. I will set you up over much." I'm not so sure how well we live up to all of this in this current climate, and I think we have much to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stoops. That is a great presentation. By the way, Rabbi Stegman and Ahmed Qureshi, I think all our scripts you'll see, notice basically will have a lot of things in common, okay, which is a great thing. Okay, good evening. I'm Sarvesh Geddam. I represent the Hindu Temple of Wisconsin. Thank you all for joining this webinar on faith and wealth. So if you visit the great temples in India, especially there's a specific temple I want to mention here, Venkateshwara Temple in Tirupati, which is in Andhra Pradesh, southern India, which is one of the most visited sacred sites in India, but across the world as well. Where you will find a massive hall where offerings are counted. Offerings means donations, basically. Anything that is donated to the temple are counted right next to the main strain. To the Hindu mind, this is not a contradiction. It is a reminder that how we handle resources is just as sacred as how we offer prayers. We look at the life through the lens of four, what we call the human goals or pursuits. At the base is dharma, which is also righteousness. Built upon it is artha and kama. Artha is essentially wealth or material security, and kama is your pursuing the desires. The pinnacle is moksha, which is liberation. Notice that artha is a legitimate central goal. For the householder like us, generating wealth is a spiritual duty. You are the engine of society. In Hinduism, wealth is worshipped as Lakshmi, the goddess of abundance or wealth. Money is not the root of all evil. It is a form of divine energy. And like a river, that energy must flow to stay pure. The secret, however, lies in our relationship with the wealth. We are taught to move from being an owner to being a trustee. Consider the life of a great Indian industrialist. His name is G.D. Birla. He was a titan of Indian industry and a close associate of Mahatma Gandhi. Mr. Birla lived by the principle of the understanding that everything ultimately belongs to the divine. He didn't see his business empire as a personal property. He saw it as a trust. He built businesses that provided livelihoods for hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and he used the surplus to build schools, universities, hospitals, and many charitable institutions across India. He famously said, "We should earn with 100 hands, but distributed with 1,000." For a trustee, wealth is not a burden of ego; it is an opportunity for service. This spirit of trusteeship is a bridge that connects us all. We see a striking parallel in the life of Andrew Carnegie. In his Gospel of Wealth, Carnegie argued that wealthy person is merely a trustee, an agent for his poorer brethren. He believed his surplus wealth was a fund to be administered for the public good. Much like the Vedic Hindu spiritual warnings about greed, Carnegie believed that to die with hoarded wealth was a spiritual failure. When we look at Birlas and these Carnegies together, the message is clear. Money is a magnificent servant, but a hollow master. When wealth is used to create jobs, libraries, universities, or hospitals, it becomes dharmic. It transforms from a material asset into a spiritual blessing. The Mahabharata, an Indian Sanskrit epic, warns us that wealth kept for the ego is like a stagnant pond, but wealth used for giving, generosity, charity, is like flowing spring. In the Hindu tradition, the highest form of giving is to make another person self-sufficient. This is why the Birla example I provided focused on industry and education that was so significant. It wasn't just charity, it was an empowerment. As we conclude, let us remember that the pursuit of wealth or material security is meant to lead us towards liberation. By practicing the trustee mindset, we develop a powerful spiritual skill called detachment. We learn to work hard and succeed, earn greatly, and yet remain free from the possessiveness or the mind mentality that binds the Atma or the true self, also called pure consciousness. May our prosperity always be tool for peace, and may our success never be a barrier to our humanity. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Right, I'll pass the baton to Roger Keller. Thank you.
Good, very thanks for that. I had to find a way in here, and it took me a little while. Sorry about that. My name is Roger Keller. I have been a professor at Brigham Young University for 26 years, teaching world religions, and now I'm retired. And so from the Latter-day Saint point of view, there is a strong stress on self-sufficiency, and that is as a result of one of the phrases that I really like is that God gives us sufficient for our needs, not our wants, not our extravagances, but we are stewards of everything that God gives us. And so as we gain income, it is our obligation to give of that income in a variety of ways. We tithe 10% of our gross income annually. And in addition to that, then once a month, we fast for 2 meals. And what we would have spent on those meals, we then contribute to the bishop of our ward, who's essentially the pastor. And those offerings can be used for helping members of the ward who have financial need. As a bishop, I help people put gas in their propane tanks. I help them with medical bills, that kind of thing. So the community is there to help one another. And in addition to that, we can give to the broader church, which gives huge amounts annually in humanitarian gifts to people. For example, this year they have committed to give 250 truckloads of food to various food closets and whatnot in the state of Wisconsin. And I'm highly supportive of that kind of thing. We're here for each other. Christ leads us to one another. And so that's a major emphasis in the church. Another one is education. If we are going to be self-sufficient, and that's important to us, then education is a huge part of that. The church supports Brigham Young University, where I taught in Provo, Utah. There are 35,000 students there, graduate and undergraduate. It also supports Brigham Young, Idaho, which has 43,000 students, largely because besides the on-campus courses, it has a program of outreach that is worldwide, where students can online get a basic education of undergraduates. And then BYU Hawaii has 3,000 students, and from 70 different countries in the Pacific Rim. And those students come to BYU Hawaii, get a 4-year degree, and if they return to their homeland, basically that pays off their tuition. And so the intent is to reach out to people all over the world, provide them with the tools to make their own livings and become self-sufficient. And starting next year, BYU is starting a medical school primarily to train people to go out around the world and to serve in various countries all over the place, to take medical services to them where they may not have them. So education, humanitarian causes are the driving force of the church, and then our tithing and our fast offerings support and undergird that. And I think I'll leave it there.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Salome D. Good from the MTO Shah Maksudi School of Islamic Sufism. I would agree with that. It seems like we're all very much on the same page and in coherence with this great topic of wealth. I feel like we should be talking about this and showing the similarities more often, since this really highlights it. When I approach this topic, I'm coming at it from a Sufi perspective, a Sufi lens. Now I have to say I'm just a student of Sufism. This is my perspective. But when I approach this, I kept thinking about wealth and what the purpose of wealth is. Wealth oftentimes gives us a sense of security. It gives us, because we have it in abundance, we turn to it when we're struggling with things. We look to it to answer whatever we have it in abundance is supposed to answer what we're struggling with. It gives us identity or worth, oftentimes, when we think of wealth. And oftentimes it's associated with finances or something out in the external world. Sufism, though, is very much focused on the internal part of us. So within the Sufi paradigm, there are these two parts. Even though I call them two different parts, they're actually one, but there's our physical dimension, our physical world, and then there's the more internal piece. The physical world, everything that has been said are things that we do, right? It's a responsibility to our community, to the human race, our neighbors, and just the environment and the world. But from an internal place, I can't help but think that, if our focus and our the answer to what we're struggling with and what we seek is coming from something external, then that really shifts the whole dynamic. And actually, in my work as a psychologist, I find that when we look more externally and we're trying to solve the problems or issues that we have externally, we tend to have, as Ahmed said, more anxiety. There's more, depression and a lot of other issues. So, really, within the Sufi perspective, it's shifting that concept of wealth into internal. And what does that mean? Um, Hazrat Ali, who is the first Shia Imam and central figure in Sufism, he's called the Gate of Knowledge. He's referred to as that. It's reported that he has said that wealth is not in having possessions, but in contentment of the soul. He also says, "Do not take do not take your fears or your tears to your pillow, but take them to the prayer mat." Right. So it's this reminder of this shift from external to internal. Um, Even Rumi has a lovely example of, he says, water around a boat will allow it to move and provide for it to travel, but water inside a boat will cause it to sink. So this concept that when we refer even to what is the wealth that I have, that which I draw upon, there is something within. The Sufi master professor Narayanga in his book Revelation says that the wealth of the lover is the beloved's love. So, in the Sufi perspective, the focus is really turning inward. And I can speak from my perspective or my experience that oftentimes, when there is something going on in my life, and it could be financial, which is very scary, and it does make us nervous. And, we keep looking to perhaps external resources, like if I just had more money to make this paycheck or make my whatever bills, right? And there's scarcity, there's fear, and that just multiplies and it leads to endless, and I'm sure everyone here could probably agree, it leads to kind of endless turmoil. However, when you turn inward and the focus is on within, connecting within, whether it's through your prayer mat or however it is that you connect with that divine, there is a direction, there is a peace, because that's where you're seeking the answers there. So I think for me, I agree with, I mean, obviously, who might agree, but I agree with everything everyone has said. And absolutely, give. And in the physical world, this is what we need. But just when I was looking into this, it just kept reminding me about the inner peace that I'm sure every faith would also agree, and they probably would say, is that it's that wealth of that connection within. Sufism, for those who might not be familiar, is a path of self-knowledge. The underlying belief is that in knowing yourself, you will know the divine and you will know the connection of the oneness that is. And so in connecting and trying to connect with that, you can't help but also give to your environment, give to your neighbor, contribute wherever there is need physically, but you have to spend time with that connection internally as well. So thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Sam Sion, and I'm a member of the Baha'i community. My thanks to the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee for allowing me to share a Baha'i perspective on wealth accumulation, and economic justice. Baha'is believe that each of us are spiritual beings, tasked with the duty of developing spiritual qualities in this material world, unfortunately. In the Baha'i faith, wealth is not viewed as inherently good or evil, like many of you have said already, but rather it is viewed as a powerful instrument, one whose moral value depends entirely on how it is acquired and then how it is used. Baha'u'llah, the prophet of the Baha'i faith, teaches us that material prosperity and spiritual development must advance together. The challenge facing humanity isn't so much wealth itself, but rather the imbalance, injustice, and spiritual emptiness that can arise when wealth becomes an end rather than a means. The Baha'i writings affirm the dignity of wealth and the legitimacy of accumulating wealth. Work performed in the spirit of service is viewed as worship. Wealth gained through honest effort, integrity, and in service to society is very much praised. Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, has said, quote, "Wealth is most commendable, provided the entire population is wealthy. If, however, a few have inordinate riches, while the rest of the population are impoverished, and no fruit or benefit accrues from that wealth, then it is only a liability to its possessor," end quote. The Baha'i Faith's teachings issue a clear warning against the extremes of wealth and poverty. In 1912, Abdu'l-Baha gave a talk in the United States where he stated that, quote, "The rich must give of their abundance. They must soften their hearts and cultivate a compassionate intelligence," end quote. Extreme inequality is not seen merely as an economic problem, but a spiritual and social disease, one that corrodes trust, unity, and the very fabric that holds society together. Now, economic justice in the Baha'i view does not mean that there is uniformity or absolute equality of outcomes. Naturally, each of us human beings have our own talents, we have our own capacities and the circumstances that we grew up. But what justice does require is that there's fairness, there's opportunity, and there's systems in place that ensure that no one has to live a life that isn't dignified. Justice is described by Baha'u'llah as, quote, "the best beloved of all things in his sight," end quote. It is this principle that allows wealth to circulate rather than stagnate, and prosperity to be shared rather than be hoarded by a few. The Baha'i Faith envisions multiple mechanisms, both personal and systematic, to promote economic justice. On a personal level, Baha'is are encouraged to practice generosity and moderation. Importantly, giving to the Baha'i Fund is exclusive to only Baha'i individuals. All fund contributions are voluntary and must be rooted in the individual's conscience. No coercion is applied to any individual to give at any time. The manner of how funds are used are to promote community development, such as the spiritual empowerment of children's classes, for the spiritual education of children, for the empowerment of junior youth, to create spaces for friendship, for prayer, for study of the holy text, as well as initiatives to promote the betterment of humanity. Baha'i administration is not overseen by a clergy, but rather a series of institutions. Members of those institutions are either democratically elected by blind ballot, or they are appointed by the institutions. There is no solicitation to be on any institution, and no salary is associated to those who serve on institutions, only the love of God. On a society level, the Baha'i writings point to the need for fair taxation, profit sharing between labor and capital, and social arrangements that protect the vulnerable while encouraging initiative. Abdu'l-Baha in many talks spoke approvingly of profit sharing as a means to reduce the conflict between workers and owners, recognizing that justice in economic relationships fosters loyalty, productivity, and harmony. Underlying all of this is a profound redefinition of success. In the Baha'i worldview, true prosperity is not measured by accumulation alone, but its contribution to the greater society. Wealth finds its highest expression when it uplifts others, strengthens communities, advances education, and alleviates suffering. A society is truly wealthy when not a few possess vast fortunes, but when all of its members have access to opportunity, security, and purpose. A moderate degree of wealth is needed in this society today that allows us to meet our fundamental needs like health, education, and other things. But we also need it to meet the material and spiritual development. So having these adequate resources allows us individuals and communities to secure our food, shelter, health, and education, which frees our energy for creativity, service, and the pursuit of establishing an ever-advancing civilization. To summarize my discussion quickly, the teachings of the Baha'i Faith call for a civilization in which material and spiritual progress advance together. Wealth, guided by justice and compassion, become a tool for unity rather than division. Prosperity in its true form becomes not something a few possess, but rather something all of humanity strives to create together for the benefit of everyone. When wealth is acquired justly and directed wisely, it becomes a means by which humanity can build institutions, cultivate knowledge, relieve suffering, and nurture the moral and spiritual capacities for all of humanity. In this light, wealth is not the purpose of our lives, but rather it is just a vital support for the unfolding of a just, united, and ever-advancing human civilization. In the words of Abdu'l-Baha, only by improving spiritually as well as materially can we make any real progress and become perfect beings, end quote. Thank you for your time. And next to Susan McNeil.
Well, good evening. My name is Susan McNeil. I'm the last speaker tonight. I am Roman Catholic and represent the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. One of the things that's been fascinating as I've listened to the other speakers is just simply how much we have in common, how much our religious traditions have in common. As Catholics, we have an entire body of work, which is known as Catholic social teaching. And while the church has always believed in the dignity of every human person created in the image and likeness of God, in 1891, Pope Leo the 13th, not the 14th, who's the current Pope, wrote a document called Rerum Novarum, which is in English on the rights and duties of capital and labor, to address the plight of workers in an industrial revolution. And if you turn on your history lessons from school, you'll probably remember some of the conditions in which workers were facing at that point. One of the things that might be a little bit more unique about the Catholic Church is that we address both individual wealth as well as institutional wealth, corporate wealth. And sometimes we've taken a fair amount of heat for that. One of the things we also recognize is that we human beings are super messy. Ahmed had thrown in the chat earlier that you can't take it with you. It's not for people's lack of trying. And we struggle with our relationship with wealth and possessions. The Catholic Church even recognizes that to the degree of what we call the seven deadly sins. Some of you have probably heard of that, two of which are greed and envy. And trust me, they are alive and well in the world today. Like many of the other traditions, the Catholic Church does not teach that wealth in and of itself is evil, but it constantly warns that wealth can become spiritually dangerous if it replaces our trust in God or it leads us to ignore the needs of others. And so at the heart of all of Catholic social teaching is the belief that, like many others tonight, everything ultimately belongs to God. We are not absolute owners of wealth, but stewards, caretakers entrusted with these resources that serve both our personal needs as well as the common good. And the same is true in our everyday life. So stewardship is a word we use daily to talk about our responsibilities towards other people. We do not believe, in fact, we would call it a heresy, something that not only is wrong, but leads people toward evil. What is termed in our culture the gospel of prosperity, or a prosperity theology, in which that sees wealth as a reward for faith. We don't believe that at all. We believe that, again, it's just a gift to us that we steward for a particular time. Our teaching begins with scripture. Jesus talks a whole lot about money because it reveals what a person truly trusts. And so in the Gospels, particularly in the book of Matthew 6, verse 24, he says, you cannot serve both God and mammon, mammon being wealth. And so that does not mean money is sinful, but to echo one of our earlier speakers, it makes a really hollow master. It can give us the illusion of self-sufficiency, which undermines our sense of radical dependence on God. And also, Jesus warns that the riches can harden our hearts. So he does so in the parable of the rich young man who walks away sad because he can't let go of everything. And a lot of us are like that. It's very hard to let go of possessions. And in the parable of the rich fool, a man stores up wealth, but it's not rich in what matters to God. At the same time, scripture also affirms work, provision, generosity, and wealth becomes good when it is shared, used responsibly, and ordered toward the love of God and neighbor. From a corporate standpoint, the church always insists that human dignity comes before profit. And so it speaks very clearly into society today. From that document that Pope Leo XIII wrote in 1891, Rerum Novarum, through modern day to Pope Leo XIV, who has also spoken about the dignity of workers in the realm of AI today. The church emphasizes that people are ends, not means, and wealth exists to serve the human person and not the other way around. Pope John Paul II, who was our pope for a very long time, famously taught in a document. We have this beautiful history of speaking about work and wealth and industry over time. And so on the 90th anniversary of Pope Leo's document, Pope John Paul wrote a document called Laborem Exercens on human work in 1981, that labor has priority over capital, meaning that money, machines, property have no dignity of its own. Only the human person does. And that means any economic system that we're part of must be judged not only by the amount of wealth it produces, the amount of profit, but by how they treat their workers, whether or not families can live in dignity, and also whether the poor are protected. One of the most important principles for Catholics is the universal destination of goods. That while owning private property is legitimate, I own my own house, well, or the bank owns some of it, I own part of it, all goods are ultimately meant for everyone. So private ownership is not an absolute, it carries with it a social obligation. So I, as a just regular person, even though I own property, I have the responsibility to use it for good. And our catechism, which is a book that compiles a lot of what our church's tradition teaches, says that when other people lack what they need to survive, our wealth has to be shared. That's a must. And in cases of extreme need, if I were to withhold my excess resources, for me, that becomes then a moral failure. And that doesn't mean forced equality or socialism, but it's a nuanced understanding that our faith demands solidarity with one another, not indifference. Additionally, a consistent theme in Catholic social teaching is that what we call the preferential option for the poor, meaning that the needs of the most vulnerable must come in first in moral decision making, and societies are judged by how they treat those with the least power. And that has nothing to do directly with politics. It flows from our faith, where Jesus identifies himself with the poor and says, "Whatever you did for one of the least, you did for me." And so we distinguish between charity and justice. Charity is giving freely out of love. I give all the time. But justice is also ensuring it goes beyond charity to make sure that systems of which people are a part do not exploit or exclude. And that includes employers, the workplace. Giving to the poor is not just optional or generous, but it's a requirement of discipleship. And then also, we're also called to an internal conversion, that I'm not supposed to be attached to my possessions. I'm to share them with one another. Ultimately, in the end, kind of my last point, is that the Catholic Church teaches that the goal of life is holiness, not accumulation. So wealth is a tool. It's to be used for great good. It can be used for great good, or it can be used for great harm. And so in faith, we are in a constant discernment. Myself, I can only look at myself as an individual, myself as someone who supervises other people, who's part of an institution, where I'm constantly asking these questions. Does my use of money reflect my love of God? Does it serve other people? And does it promote human dignity? Faith transforms how wealth is earned, used, and shared. True richness is never found in possessions, but in relationship with God and responsibility for one another. And so I'm going to turn this back over to Ahmed and JC for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you to all of our presenters. It was a wonderful discussion. I want to do two things before we start the question and answer. First of all, I would like to thank our entire Committee for Interfaith Understanding for putting this program together. And the Committee for Interfaith Understanding will be having another webinar on February 10th at 6:30 p.m. Registration for that will go up fairly soon, maybe not this week, perhaps next week. The topic for that presentation will be the concept of fasting and fasting rites and different faith traditions. And we hope to have speakers from Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Baha'i, and other traditions as well. And we also note that that is set to take place approximately 1 week before both the Lenten season and the Ramadan season begin as well. And of course, there are other faith traditions that have rituals that are also related to fasting or giving up things as well. And so we encourage all of you, when that becomes available and is publicized, to sign up for that as well. So what we're going to do now is we are going to open this up for question and answer. The formal recording will end now, although JC, if you want to keep the recording and cut it later to preserve the question and answer, that's okay as well. And presenters, as JC noted, are also welcome to make any questions or comments if they like. And I know we're at the bottom of the hour, and so if anybody wants to drop off, we're not keeping tabs on that either. You know, I understand our hour is up of your time, and again, we thank you for joining us.
Also, Reverend Dr. Stoops had to go teach class, so anyways, I'll just let you know that. But I really appreciate everyone sharing. Like as Susan said, I learned a lot, and I also was inspired about the similarity of the answers. It's just very inspiring. So, any questions, or people are still processing, but any questions or clarifications, please put them in the chat, or if you're a presenter as well.
And I'll add this as well, just for those who observed as well. The presenters did not get together before the presentation and compared their presentations and tried to make them sound, how can we point out points of similarity? It was just something that naturally came as we individually did. The only thing we did coordinate is we tried to coordinate the order and passing the microphone baton, as it were, to the next person. Questions?
I'll share something that Susan, you talked about the most vulnerable, having a disabled child. I can tell you that's an important part of the theology of disability. And so often, just having my son out in public seems to be a evangelical tool for that type of attitude and I just really appreciate that. I know this in all these denominations seems to be a very important part. So Rhonda.
Yeah, hi, thanks, JC, and thanks everyone on the panel. Sorry, I'm not on video. I'm in the bowels of the basement of my house doing a workout while you all were speaking. So thank you for that. More a comment than a question, and maybe we can answer it a little bit. I also was, truly inspired by the similarities and the trust of this webinar. And in these days where there's so much division, it was really was very heartening to hear a topic that is as controversial as how faith communities take in wealth and understand it. That we had such that we had such commonalities, and it's just, my hope that we can bring this, this community together when times are a little bit harder. And I just thank you for giving me a little bit of hope. So any comments from anyone on the panel, that would be great. But I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll offer this towards comment on that. I think that we all exist, and the people here, we're probably generally better informed about some of the disparities that occur and the injustices that we sometimes see. And I think that all of our faiths call to the other, to help the needy, and that includes financially. It includes as other ways as well. And our faiths, I believe, encourage us not to be arrogant, but to be humble before God. And that also when we spend our wealth in charity, that we also do so with the purpose, with the heart to help others and not to make people feel bad as recipients of charity as well. And yeah, and you can't take it with you. There's another prophetic saying, paraphrasing, that basically says, you don't take what you eat with you. You don't take the clothing, that wears out too. And your wealth, you don't carry away with you either. The only thing that survives is education, charity, and, righteous children. So it's, anyway, it's a good thing that we're very together on how to handle things such as wealth in a society that has great needs.
Tom Heinen asked a question. Every dollar that we spend is, or this sounds like Katie though, every dollar that we spend is a sense of reflection of our morals and values as well as our needs. What do faith say about how money should be spent in addition to how it should be donated? I just reread one of the sermons from MLK where he talked about the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat. A thermometer just takes the temperature, and a thermostat can control it. And I think he would have been answering that you really need to spend your money as if you're a thermostat so that it has an effect on as much as possible. But is there any other presenters who want to help answer that? I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Tom and Katie. They are Roman Catholic as I am, so they probably know this answer as well as I do. That we would say money should be spent ethically, to consider who benefits from when I buy something, how am I supporting institutions that might contribute to the degradation of the human person, as well as being careful where I donate my money and doing thoughtful research and discernment. I hope that answers the question.
It was easy for me to dump part of my presentation into the chat. Although, as I recall, the second part of it, I wound up on the cutting room floor for the sake of time. The prophetic saying from my tradition.
So I don't know if this anecdote is particularly appropriate or not, but it really jumped to my head, especially because we're talking about wealth. My first pulpit, the first synagogue of which I was a rabbi, was in Westchester, New York. It's a little north of Manhattan, and it was a pretty affluent area. So here I am, this kid from Milwaukee serving in Westchester, New York, and I remember one of the first bar mitzvah weekends that we have. That's when a young boy turns 13. It's a kind of rite of passage. The family, which was a pretty uber wealthy family, spent I kid you not, and I still like it still boggles my mind. $1 million on the bar mitzvah weekend, and this is 20 years ago, right? Like everyone who came to the party, there were over 400 people, got like the newest Air Jordans, which were like $150 or $180 at the time, just as like a thank you for coming gift. And it was preposterous to me, probably in all of the both cringing and also religious, rabbinic, ethical ways that I couldn't deal with. And it was sometime later that our synagogue was doing a capital campaign. And the senior rabbi, I was the associate rabbi at the time, the senior rabbi, the way he tells the story is he went up and right away said, hey, we're doing a capital campaign. We're looking to kick off the fundraising, and we would like you to be, the first donors to bat leadoff. We're asking you for $1 million. And he said, before he could even finish the sentence, they simply said yes. Right? It was like a 3-minute ask, and he got 7 figures. And this is not an ends justifies the means. It is not a one good thing equals one bad thing or anything like that. I can't even imagine that kind of wealth. And when at least the question is of ethical giving, for as much as I still recoil on the inside for how much they spent for a weekend celebration, at the same time, I also am so grateful for their immediate and not only not begrudging, but just wholehearted genuine gift to the community as well. So I don't know how to put all those in the package. I don't think that's a great answer whatsoever. It just seems at least like a practical story of when we're talking about unimaginable wealth, how at least this one family chose to engage and wrestle with that question.
Moish, I grew up in Fairfield County, so I can tell you I have stories just like that. Anyways, and we were the Catholics, and so we definitely. We'll have to have coffee sometime. Others?
Well, if there are no others, and I'll talk for about 20 or 30 seconds, in which time somebody can raise their hand or unmute and interrupt. Again, I would like to thank all of the presenters and all of the attendees, and I welcome you to join our next presentation on Tuesday, February 10 at 6:30 p.m. Vesting Rights and Faith Traditions. And we will endeavor to get a wide variety of speakers from our member judicatories to address the topic. And again, we promise not to compare notes in advance. And we'll see what happens. I think maybe there might be more diversity on fasting, but somehow something tells me that the purpose of the practice might come together. Well, but we won't prejudge that. We'll see what happens. And so if there's nothing else,
I just want to add that the fasting thing was very interesting that Roger brought up that's part of their monthly tradition in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because that was new to me recently. And I just, yes, there is things you might think but you probably will learn new things.
So everyone, have a great evening then. We will close the presentation, although now I see 3 new messages. Thank you, everyone. Yes, thanks to everyone. And I look forward to gathering with you all again